Welcome back to another week of the NFL Injury Report. We're going into Week 10 here, and I definitely say it every year because I'm pretty sure I said it last week too, but it seems like people are just getting hurt at an unprecedented rate this year. And we're not talking about, a little strain here, a sprain here. People are dislocating things, and it's starting to get pretty severe. And the most recent example is, of course, the Washington Commanders quarterback, Jayden Daniels, who got hurt in that game against the Seahawks on Monday night. But we're going to get into that a little bit later. First, the rest of the NFL. DeAndre Swift missed last week, I believe. Yeah, he definitely did. Missed last week for the Bears against that heck of a game, absolute haymaker against the Bengals. But he returned to practice Wednesday, and he's expected to play on Sunday. So that'll be a nice get back for that Bears offense. Puka Nacua, coming off the bye week and first game back since that ankle injury. Left with a rib injury. He had images that were negative. He was limited to start the week on Wednesday, but he's expected to play against the 49ers on Sunday. So pay attention to his practice participation over the next couple of days, especially on Friday and going into the game on Sunday. Michael Pittman, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. He was limited on Wednesday as well with a glute injury, not one you see too often, but not that uncommon. More information should be available Friday. His status is still up in the air. It's unclear as to how severe it is and if he's likely to miss any time. Another wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr., struggling a little bit this year. He was dealing with a shoulder injury that we touched on a little bit last week. He was wearing that sling. Along with that, he's now dealing with what's being called a low-grade ankle sprain. He did not practice Wednesday, and he hasn't been ruled out, but pay attention to what his practice participation is like. You'd hopefully like to see him log a limited participation on Thursday and then another limited or full on Friday. If he does not practice any of those last 2 days, it seems unlikely that he will play. It's an interesting development considering that Travis Hunter was recently placed on IR, the short-term IR, for 4 weeks, and they just traded for Jacoby Myers. So for fantasy-wise, at least, pay attention to if Thomas is playing, not only if he's on your team, but if you have Jacoby Myers. Myers might be in for a pretty big workload his first game in a Jacksonville Jaguars uniform. Tucker Kraft having a great season for Green Bay, but he unfortunately tore his ACL this past week. He was placed on IR. He is officially done for the season. James Cook, another guy who's having a great season for Buffalo at that running back position. He's popped up on the injury report with a foot or ankle injury, allegedly from the game last week against the Chiefs. Reportedly, he's been feeling a little bit more soreness. He did not practice on Wednesday, but he has 2 more days. I'm recording this on Thursday. The practice reports aren't out yet. But Friday will definitely give a clear picture as far as his participation and what's likely to come for his availability on Sunday. Rico Dowdle, who's been taking the league by storm, ever since Hubbard went down for the Carolina Panthers, and now they're splitting a little bit more time. But he did not practice on Wednesday with a quadriceps injury that he suffered during the game against the Packers. You could tell that he was definitely moving a little bit more cautious and grimacing a little bit more throughout the end of the game there. But pay attention to his availability. If he goes down, obviously he's been a big piece of that Panthers offense over the past couple of weeks. They'll still have Hubbard available, but he's obviously been playing like an absolute beast. He's been on a mission, so pay attention to that. Garrett Wilson, finally getting to the Jets. I mean, what a week. But Garrett Wilson, he was limited in practice on Wednesday, which is a good sign as these are his first practice reps since hyperextending his knee 2 games ago, 3 if we're counting the bye week this past week. And speaking of the bye week, I really thought the Jets couldn't lose a bye week, but depending on your point of view, trading away their 2 best defenders in Sauce Gardner to the Colts and Quinnen Williams to the Cowboys, which that alone just stings, it is a pretty good way to try and lose the bye week. We'll see what happens, but I mean, the Jets are just a little bit more worse than what they were before, but yeah, I guess you wouldn't have expected them to get worse, but here we are. Anyways, the belle of the ball, Jayden Daniels. Let's get to him. So if you happen to be watching the game, you saw a pretty gruesome looking injury when Jayden Daniels went down to the ground. He dislocated his elbow. They did not show it again, thankfully, but you can certainly still find it on YouTube. Regardless, specifically speaking, it's his non-throwing elbow, and that's going to come into play here in more ways than one that we'll get to in a second. But let's look at the anatomy first. Your elbow is made up of 3 separate bones. Your humerus coming down from your upper arm, and then the 2 bones in your forearm, your radius and your ulna. And specifically, that ulna will come around and hook onto that bottom part of your humerus with your radius on the other side. And The interesting thing about the elbow is that it obviously hinges, where you have a lot of that interaction between the ulna and the humerus, but it's also a joint that allows some rotation, that pronation and supination through the forearm. So when there's more than one plane of motion that a joint is able to move from, it complicates things a little bit more. But regardless, along with the actual bone structure that makes up the joint, you have ligaments on either side as well as the joint capsule itself to help to stabilize. Specifically, you have your UCL, that ulnar collateral ligament that is commonly referred to as that Tommy John ligament, or this ligament that Tommy John surgery is responsible for correcting, as well as the lateral collateral ligament on the outside of that elbow. Now, an elbow can dislocate in several different ways. It can be posterior, anterior, posterior lateral, or posterior medial, with posterior lateral dislocations being the most common. Posterior medial is a little bit less common. Roughly, it's around like 80% of elbow dislocations are posterior lateral. And what we mean by that is that if I go this way, this direction is posterior, and then lateral being out this way. The way that these dislocations most often occur is when you have what we call a fall on an outstretched hand, or a foosh injury, where, that's just fun to say, foosh, where you're planting through this arm and then you have a direct axial load, so following the length of that bone, up through your arm, and then there's either some amount of rotation down at the forearm that's still occurring, or through the shoulder itself. And for Daniel specifically, you saw the arm plant, his hand was down, and then his body continued to rotate over top, which ultimately that force is going to go to an area where it has more motion to try and absorb it, or the weakest point, and that wound up being his elbow. And that was apparently obvious, as if you saw afterwards, obviously his arm was not only at an incorrect angle for where your elbow should be, but there's also that bony kind of prominence and contour change around that elbow. Now, they have not officially stated the severity of his injury. He was getting an MRI on Monday. This is Thursday when I'm recording it, and it's been a little while, but there has been no specific reports. It's believed, at least according to head coach Dan Quinn on Monday night, that maybe it was Sunday night was the game. That's not important. Regardless, it was believed that he did not fracture that forearm or any of the bones within that elbow, which is a good sign. There's two main classifications when it comes to severity of an elbow dislocation, one being simple and the other being complex. Simple is when you just have soft tissue or ligamentous injuries, and complex is when you have fractures. The more severe cases, just like we had touched on for Scatabo as well as Tyreek Hill, is if there's any damage to any neurovascular structure, so arteries as well as nerves, especially that ulnar nerve that runs through that UCL. Like I said, no definitive information yet, but if it is a simple dislocation, obviously that's going to be a little bit faster recovery and a better outcome as well. Typically for a simple dislocation, you're looking at somewhere around 4 to 8 weeks with a brace, and then eventually progressing to increasing the range of motion during that time while still in the brace and out of it, as well as then improving the strength and the stability to be able to return to sport. When you're looking at a more complex or more severe elbow dislocation, the first thing they always do is look for the blood flow, specifically on the field, right? So when Daniels first got the trainers there, they looked at the blood flow to see if there's any concern with that, because that immediately upgrades the case to being severe. Because of that being more complex, or if there's a fracture, you then have to brace it still, but allow it to heal first. So that's going to naturally increase the recovery time to allow for that fracture to heal. So typically for a complex dislocation, you're looking at somewhere to 6 to 10, 6 to 12 weeks. Again, this becomes more complicated if a neurovascular structure is involved. Now, the really interesting thing, or the thing that makes it a little bit more convoluted for Daniels in his return to play, is that it's his non-throwing arm. Now, if this was his throwing arm, he'd probably definitively just be done for the season. Simply because in order to get back to the level of play that he would need to be at, it would take much longer to get that arm back into throwing correctly and mechanically proper. The only concern with it being his non-throwing arm is the sport that he plays and the way that he plays it. So because of football being such a high contact sport, that's essentially all it is. Even though it's not his throwing arm, he's still going to be taking hits there, or even trying to stiff arm, and especially the way that he plays the game as a very mobile quarterback where he likes to run and get out of the pocket, make plays on the move. He's going to be trying to move defenders, running, taking hits at awkward angles. Something like that is definitely important to consider, even though it's not his throwing arm. So yes, he should be able to get back faster, especially if it's just a simple dislocation because it's not his throwing arm. But because of the sport that he plays and the position that he's playing at, it's still likely to be a little bit longer than that 4 to 6 week mark, looking at 8 weeks, 6 maybe at the very best for a simple dislocation, because that elbow has to be ready to take a hit. If it isn't ready, then you run the risk that something more severe is going to happen, whether it be a fracture or damage to some of those surrounding arteries or nerves. Now, Daniels as a whole has been injured a lot this season, and it's worth considering. I'm sure the coaching staff of the Commanders are considering this as well. We're going into week 10. He's looking at somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks minimum. The Commanders have not been playing particularly well. I believe they're 3-6. It may be worth considering bringing Daniels down for the season and just shutting him down essentially. Because yes, he's dealt with the hamstring injury, the knee sprain, and now this elbow injury that he's going to be out at least until week 14 to week 16, which at that point you have somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks left in the regular season. Unless there's some magical turnaround for Marcus Mariota in this offense, it seems unlikely they're going to make the playoffs. So a decision will definitely have to be made as far as, does this make sense for Daniels to continue to play, or let him focus on rehabbing, making sure that he's 100%, and then getting some time in to get ready for training camp and then next season. But that's a little bit more information about that elbow dislocation that he suffered, whether it was Sunday night or Monday night. I'm starting to second guess myself at this point. As always, if you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment below. Thank you for subscribing and sharing this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.